Okay, looks like we're good.
All right, thank you. This is the first meeting of the Right to Know Advisory Committee's Technology Subcommittee. And let's go around the room and introduce ourselves. Eric, do you want to start?
Yes, I'm Eric Stout, the member with background in information technology, supposedly.
More than supposedly. Linda?
Hi, I'm Linda Clancy. I represent the press.
Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Beveridge. I'm representing the Maine Association of Broadcasters, and I may have to jump off a little bit early, just so you're aware.
Okay. Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Barr. I represent law enforcement interests.
And Kevin?
Hello, Kevin Martin, representing state government interests.
And my name is Judy Meyer, and I represent Maine's publishers. And we are here to talk about two distinct things. And thank you so much to the staff for helping us with this. The first is list management tools and the accessibility of off-system records. And the second piece is policies around email, capture and retention of text messages, and other technology tools that are less discoverable. And that's the scary part, the less discoverable, because you have to be pretty tech savvy to find it all. But let me just get Jim Campbell's input out of the way, and that will set the stage for our discussion. His message is that government business, no matter how conducted, needs to be traceable, recorded, and available no matter what the media or technology in use. And I think that is certainly the mindset of this committee. So we're here to figure it out. And Eric did a bunch of pre-work on gathering up policies and guidance for state government. And Eric, this is just state government, not county and municipal, right? They operate under their own rules.
Right. The scope of what I put out there, and the staff has posted it on the committee website under the Subcommittee for Technology. What I assembled, that is state government, and I also threw in some references to how the federal government does it, just as as a reference point.
Okay, what I'm sharing is this is your summary, Eric.
Yes.
Okay. So the question for the committee is, do we want to go through these policies one at a time and, thumbs up, thumbs down, or do we want to talk in more general terms about the need for these things?
And if I can add before you started, there's really two documents. One of them is existing references from the state archives and other things. This is just reference to OIT policies and HR policies, but there's more foundational records management policies, of which email is a type of record. So I guess I would suggest starting there, with this one. Okay. Starting there, because that really starting with the records management policies and references and training, of which there's specific things where email is specifically mentioned, and by kind of extension, the other forms of electronic correspondence beyond traditional email, such as chat and all these other new ways to communicate electronically, in principle, I think would be covered by what the records management policies and training calls email. But I mean that would be something for the state archives to weigh in on. But I think by extension, in principle, these other new methods would be included in the intent. The difficulty is how do you capture some of these that are on non-state controlled devices. So anyway, this is I'd suggest starting here, and then the other document that you had up first is an attachment to that.
Okay. So in your research, Eric, did you find that most state agencies have these policies in place and have implemented them, or is this the exception?
Well, the records retention policies are really statewide. So the first reference there policies and guidance for state government. That's sent out annually. That was put in place in October of 2013. And a reminder is sent out every fall, October, November, by the Secretary of State. It goes out to all state employees, not just the executive branch, but all state employees. I'm not sure about the judicial branch, probably not in scope, but most, 90% plus of the state employees are required to read and acknowledge this policy. And then I highlighted here, as it relates to actions by employees, as it relates to correspondence and email. So it says that they should save and retain accordingly their correspondence. And if they leave, then the manager is responsible for making sure that's not lost and is therefore discoverable.
Mm-hmm.
So that's from the state archives. So agencies, just referring to the executive branch agencies, the cabinet departments under the governor in particular, they are supposed to, all employees are supposed to annually recognize, acknowledge this policy, and then follow it. So the agencies wouldn't have anything that really varies from this, other than I know from exposure that some of the agencies over time have reinforced this. I know DHHS made a real push back in 2014, 15 to really emphasize this. I know Department of Labor made a push. I know that other agencies, specifically IF&W, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, have specifically emphasized this, just to call out those three as examples. But they wouldn't have necessarily their own policies. They would just reference the statewide archives records management policies and email in particular. The second, if you want me to keep going.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the second bullet there, where it says state agent, go back up a little bit.
Sorry.
Where it says
Yep.
state agency records training and resources. So there's this link on the archives website for records management basic principles for state employees, and especially slides 46 through 60 of that. Probably take an hour to go through it, and that's part of the policy, is that employees are expected to review that. But 46 through 60, those slides specifically are about email management. And then what's the next one here? There's another slideshow specifically about managing electronic records. And in that slideshow, slides 14 through 27 are specifically about email. So there is guidance on that. And then the third bullet there, state records retention schedules. Again, this is statewide guidance for state agencies. And the general schedules, there's a schedule 13 that talks about state agency correspondence, of which email and in principle, text messages and other newer modes would follow the same principle. If it's government business, it's correspondence. That's a type of correspondence. So the guidelines there are spelled out in that general schedule 13. Which says that there's 5 levels of correspondence in that. Top level agency officials that have historical value correspondence related to policies and programs, not your workaday stuff, but retention worthy, historical retention worthy. It's potentially permanent, and that correspondence, including email, is supposed to convey ownership to the state archives. Then the next level is program correspondence, which is the bulk of the business of the agencies. And the retention on that email and correspondence ties to the retention value of that program, those program records, whether that's 5 years, 10 years. For example, an oil spill would what EPA calls a brownfield. The retention of those records is 40 years. So correspondence related to those records should follow those program records. Then there's your general administrative, workaday administrative non-program correspondence, which has a retention of 2 years. And then there's what's called transitory correspondence, which is things that you need to know at the moment, but are not really retention worthy. That can be deleted at any time. That's not supposed to be, a significant correspondence, things like, I'll be 10 minutes late for the meeting, or the copier is fixed, or, things like that are of transitory nature, that are deleted will. And then there's non-business junk mail, that is the fifth type of correspondence. All that's covered under Schedule 13, which has been in place for many, many years and is referenced in the annual policy reminder, the first bullet. So I'll stop talking right there, but all those links give details to what I summarized, but email and electronic correspondence is sprinkled in with the foundational guidance on records management generally. In other words, if it's government business, it's a government record. So I'll stop there for now.
Eric, do you know, I know the archive puts out municipal and county records retention schedules as well. Do you know if the language matches across the board?
I'm not as familiar with those, but yes, if you go to the maine.gov/SOS Secretary of State /ARC archives, then there's a local. So there's a series of, about 20 local schedules, and they're similar because the principles are similar, but I'm really not familiar, as familiar with those. I probably should be. But the principle, the records management principles are really foundational, worldwide. They're based on worldwide principles of records management, depending on the value criteria for any kind of business or government record. But to your question, I'm not really familiar with that, but anybody could look up that main part of that website and just go to the local schedules and see.
Take a look. Yeah. Okay. So from your understanding, would these policies cover these list management tools?
Well, I think that's something that really would be a good focus for the state archives. The state archivist is very interested, and Kate McBride has participated with us with the Right to Know Advisory Committee. She's interested in, if I can say with confidence, I'd say that she's interested in any clarifying guidance to track with the new technology and the practices around that. But I kind of declared here that in principle, in red there, in principle, this would also include text messages and other types of correspondence, but it doesn't explicitly say in writing, text messages or phone-to-phone messages. But just in principle, if it's government business, then it's a government record. But the difficulty is in further down on this page, at the bottom, the difficulty is how to capture those things. But before we leave that, maybe just talk about HR.
Yep.
We got those things sprinkled in, and in the attachment, the Word document attachment that's also posted on the website, it does have these two provisions here. Number 3, state employees shall not conduct state business through personal email accounts That's an HR work rule. Thou shalt not do that. And then in the next one, which is an OIT policy for the 12,000 people that OIT issues computers to as a state computer. It says there 5.7, no state business may be conducted through personal email accounts. This prohibition applies irrespective of whether the device is state issued or otherwise. In other words, if you use your state laptop, you can't do state business through personal email accounts, and it doesn't matter whether you're using your personal phone or your home computer. If it's state government business, it should be conducted through a main.gov email account.
So I just remember during the LePage administration, he issued a directive that this should also include texts. Was that written into the policy?
Yeah, so what that was, I remember that, Judy. That was actually Peter Steele, who was LePage's communications director at the time. There was Adrian Bennett, who is the press release officer, but Peter Steele was the director of communications. And what he did is he issued basically a one-liner to his communication directors. So that really only got issued to the departmental communications directors. It didn't really get promulgated as a, push down to every rank and file employee. But yes, there is a statement that that I did see at the time, and it went from Peter Steele to his 14 or so communication directors in the major departments. That says that resulted from the so-called CDC document shredding case that your journalist covered so competently back at the time. But all that was, it didn't really get baked into these broader policies, specifically about text messaging. But it was just that went out to his communication directors. So they felt that covered it.
Is there any appetite on the committee to see that baked in anywhere, texts specifically?
I think that's important. I think it's, it's only the first step in the whatever technology is next to come. I think it's a really important detail. Yeah.
And I think to segue to the next item that covers that, I threw that in there where it says that, maybe scroll down a bit, Judy, if you can. The federal government adopted guidelines in 2014. It says any government official received on an official's personal email account must be forwarded to a government account or copied to a government account so that it's discoverable. So it does say in the first line there that's not bolded, employees create federal records when they conduct agency business using personal electronic messaging accounts or devices. So this would be inclusive to Amy's point that it's not just email specifically as we narrowly define it, but any kind of messaging account or devices, which would be your text messages, which are harder to capture, almost impossible to capture, unlike email, which we can do a cloud capture, Microsoft 365, because we have control of that, to be able to discover that, but not so with phone to phone. When your phone number texts another phone number, that's Verizon or AT&T. That's not something that's easily capturable. So the way the feds do it since 2014 is, and I see it says 15, so maybe it was 15. Yeah, so I think it was 14 in the U.S. Code, but then it got picked up and promulgated through an archives bulletin in 15. But that's how they do it. If you kind of scan through there, is that they just make sure that within 20 days that it gets capturable in the government agency email or document management system. It's not just on your phone or on your personal email account. The famous Hillary Clinton server and all that, that was after this. The critique was that, somebody should have let her know about these, the U.S. Code and the subsequent archives and the Office of Management and Budget that all issued guidance around this, that making sure that those other sources were capturable. And then down below, to segue further into, in principle, yeah, you should say, oh yeah, I should do this, but how do you do it? So this is my little explanation when I'm trying to explain the challenges here to people doing FOA requests or attorneys in the AG's office doing litigation discovery. How do you do that if it's just on your phone? So you can read that, and then down below is not me talking. That's an excerpt from a Fordham University article that was written for lawyers about tech questions. And basically, if somebody doesn't preserve it on their text message on their phone, or doesn't somehow forward that into an email system, and I'm not actually sure the mechanics of how to do forward from text to email. Maybe others on the group here know how to do that. I should learn how to do that. But in principle, the idea is that you should make it discoverable, but in practice, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking from my perspective, how would I want to, within 20 days, transfer all my texts to an email so it's preserved? Is this even doable?
It is doable. I mean, I know I can forward myself texts all the time. You can send an email to yourself from a text message.
Mm-hmm.
So it would send but you would have to physically select the entire conversation to send. And you have to just trust that people are going to do that, in a timely manner. I think, though, the other thing to think about too, in this, when it comes to text messages, phone-to-phone contact, you also have to consider text message apps like WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook, which how they love to talk about their data. And like Signal, that's another text message app that's not specific to whatever your phone maker model is. And as Eric said, the cell phone providers don't save the records of the text messages that are more than whatever X number of weeks or months old. I don't know what the retention is there, but it needs to be broader than just saying text message. But I think it's absolutely a reality, and it's only going to become more so. Gen Z doesn't use regular phone calls, and they don't particularly care for email either.
Linda,
So-
you want
so-
to weigh in? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add before the others weigh in. I just wanted to say that, in my opinion, the reason I offered up the example you're looking at, the explanation you're looking at, and the example from the feds, is that it would be good to have more explicit guidance like the feds have, that originated from the 44 U.S. Code and then got promulgated out as OMB policy and NARA guidance, both issued guidance on that, to follow the legislative intent, to be explicit about making these things, taking them out of these, other electronic messaging systems or text messages. So I guess my recommendation is that we should recommend that we follow up and have a conversation with the state archives about if they want to consider, as they evolve their records management guidance, which includes electronic records and email specifically, whether the email guidance should extend to these other forms of text messaging and these apps. In other words, be explicit, and then to send that out as part of their annual reminder as the state policy. So rather than just us talking about it, I think we should take the opportunity to, and invite the new state archivist into this conversation. And then I'll shut up. I've been talking too much and let the others talk.
I can't see everybody on my screen, so if you want to weigh in, just pop in when you think you can. Linda?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Eric. This was really helpful. Appreciate all of what you dug up. It kind of baffles me that, this has been evolving over the past 10, 12 years, I guess. And at the front end, we just don't say absolutely no communications except through phones distributed through the place of employment or through the computers, and no, you don't communicate about work through any social media or any apps. And I was just reading about Proton Mail, and it's got 75 million users and it's growing, and that's encrypted. And so if somebody's going to try to go secret, they're going to go secret to talk about something. But if it's laid out at the front end saying, just don't do it, and with the threat of being fired, why isn't that laid out, I guess?
Judy, you're sharing your screen, but I don't know if you saw that Kate McBride, the state archivist, is on, and she says, I'm here if you need me. So I don't know if someone can allow her to.
Yeah, Anna, can we let Kate in?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Awesome. I apologize. I came into the meeting late, so I probably missed a little bit of the beginning. So catch me up. What do you need from me?
Well, I will summarize, and Eric, jump in here if I botch it up. But we were talking about the retention schedules and the facts that they don't explicitly mention these list management tools or other means of communication, and whether that should be considered as a specific reference rather than just in records in principle. And then you caught the last part about the annual training and directive not to use personal devices for communication on state business. But I just want to make sure that when we have these conversations that there's a whole lot of government outside the state that we need to capture in this when we're talking about it, which, I mean, Kate, you guys do general schedules for every blessed body of government in the state. So you kind of know what the scale is. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing to keep in mind with any of our schedules is they're not supposed to be technology specific. So they're supposed to be about the content of the message. So the way they're supposed to be read is that if you were talking about state business in any way, that is a state record. So I think the danger of listing lots of different technologies is that they change so often. And the reality is too, I think, human nature is human nature, and we can certainly remind people, and I'd be happy to include that as part of the annual, preservation policy, annual reminder. But I think people are going to talk in the way that they naturally talk. And I think the danger with text is how different is that than someone walking down the hall and talking to someone. And we can't capture all those conversations. So it's more, I think our guidance has to be more about what is the content. If you're talking about something policy driven or some policy decision, and you're talking about it over text, the guidance should be that goes towards, needs to be documented. That's a public record. But if it's quick messages here and there about, hey, did you get the report? Yes, I did. I saw it. Thanks. That's more quick check-in correspondence. So it's a lot of it's about the content.
Okay. Eric shared with us federal guidelines for texting, and Eric, I took some notes, but jump in here if I've got it wrong here. But employees that use text or other devices within 20 days, they have to convert that into and it's about government business. They have to convert it into an email for storage. Is that a reasonable process to adopt in Maine?
The hard part in Maine right now is we don't have great digital preservation system. We don't have one at all for long-term archival quality of material. I think guidance like that can work, but it's still very dependent and very reliant on individual people keeping that in mind and taking the initiative to do it themselves. So a lot of the conversations we've had in some of our working groups talking about emails or social media, that kind of thing, is how much can we very reasonably expect state employees to do on their own? And what becomes so burdensome that people just don't do it because they have too many other things to do. I mean, I think that's a request or a statement we can make to people. I'm just not sure how many will follow through. How effective will it be? Would be my question. Eric, what do you think? Do you think?
Yeah. So
work?
that's a great point, Kate, and I'm sure we're so glad that you were able to join us and join the discussion too. In my support of FOA, I have had 94 FOA support cases so far this year, of over the 1,000 that agencies get. So I get involved in a little less than 10%. And so, this question comes up sometimes about, capturing email. So with email, because it's in the Maine.gov system, anything since we migrated to the cloud in 2017, the last 4.5 years, whether the person deleted it or not, it is discoverable through the cloud. It's 100% discoverable currently through the cloud. Prior to 17, less so, depends if they archived it, saved it. But when people ask about text messages, as I always have to give the answer that we showed at the bottom there, that it's only if they preserved it themselves, because that's not part of the state system. But what Kate is talking about is that, you can try to teach correct principles and hope that they follow it. But if they don't, then do you have a fallback option to make it discoverable if they didn't preserve it? And so that's what she's referring to, that we're talking about within the state government, state agencies, email support system. We can discover it if the agency authorizes it. We can find their email even if they've deleted it or didn't properly preserve it. And for the important things like, high level policies and programs that a commissioner should be preserving, even if they didn't, do we have a fallback option to preserve it and make it discoverable under FOA or for other reasons like litigation or the agency business needs for it, or the need to preserve it for historical or research purposes. But when it comes to text messages, if it's in that platform, if it's in your app or, whatever Signal is, and now we have encrypted apps, if it's in that and it's under the control and possession of the individual user, and it's not, we don't have a fallback position for the state IT people to be able to discover it, as we do in the Microsoft email system, unless it gets transferred into that email system or transferred into a future digital preservation system that the state archivist just mentioned. And if it's only in the device or only on that app that only they have possession and control over, then we're really depending on the individual to follow the correct principles that we're trying to teach them or expect them to have, and there's no fallback.
Chris, you had your hand up?
I did, thank you. As you might imagine, I have many questions about this. One question I guess I would start out with is for Kate, and I don't see her on the screen anymore, but that's okay, because it's more, I guess, something she said made me think about something I've considered before, which is, this idea that, well, you can't FOA or conversations. If you're out in the hall having a discussion with someone, you can't FOA that. And it's occurred to me before. I want to be clear, I'm not advocating this, but whether or not there should be just simply, we don't have the technology by the sounds of it to capture this stuff in any kind of practical way or efficient way or automatic way. So should text messages, for example, just be exempt from FOA? And much like a conversation, you would just say, okay, well, as a matter of law, these are not going to be subject to FOA. Again, I'm not advocating that. It's more just something I've thought about, because I think one of the issues is there's no question, to Jim's point, there's no question that text messages and all these other kinds of ways of communicating in text in some way, even comments on a state website, on a Facebook page, there's no question that those, in my mind anyway, that those are, public records. And the problem is it seems like a huge technological issue to capture all these things in a meaningful way. One question that I wondered as soon as the idea of forwarding text messages by email is the practical one, and I'm looking at it as someone who works on FOA requests, which is how searchable are those? I don't think you can search screenshots, but maybe this is something different that's being talked about that I'm not aware of or thinking about. But I guess that I have two questions. I guess it's more for Eric. First, these policies, and did we get sent a copy of these? I don't remember getting them, but if we did, I must have just missed them. But if it's possible to get what's on the screen sent to us.
Yeah, Chris, they were sent to the subcommittee by Peggy on Monday.
Okay.
But they're also posted on the Right to Know Advisory Committee website under the subcommittee link.
Okay.
This and the Word document email use policies, the details are both posted.
Okay, that's great. I think I must have just missed it. Thank you very much. I guess my question is, as I understood what you were saying, these are all only applicable to executive branch employees. Do we know does the legislature have any kind of similar policies in place regarding that address text messaging or anything? That would be one question I'd wonder about. To Kate's point earlier about, archiving should be sort of content oriented as opposed to how things are sent or created. I agree with that. But given that we have a schedule specific to emails, I think maybe that should be amended in some way to say electronic communications generally, and not Because it seems like right now, a lot of what I've heard is, and based on what very little research I did in advance of this meeting, it looks like around the states, it's sort of implied or in principle, like Eric was saying, that text messages and these other things are public records, but it's not really clear or expressly stated, except maybe with respect to emails, at least in policies like this. And I won't go on any further other than saying when we're talking about baking these things in, one thing I think we need to consider is where should they be baked in, including whether or not they should be actually put somehow in the law itself, in the FOA itself. So I know I've said a lot. I know I've sort of addressed different people as I've been talking, and I apologize if I've been confusing, but those are my thoughts at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Kate?
Thank you. I just wanted to provide a quick update with that. We are working on revising our general schedules, which will address more directly emails as well as all digital communication. So we can certainly tie text messaging into that. I think my only concern, again, is, as Eric had pointed out, is the how. How do we capture that information? And that, I think, is the part that's still not really clear. But certainly within the general schedules, we're going to be addressing technology, digital communication, and providing some better guidance around that will hopefully be much clearer for state agencies to use. That's something that the Archives Advisory Board is working on right now.
Thanks, Kate. Kevin?
Yeah, so I think it's a very challenging issue in a lot of ways because, as we keep mentioning different schedules, and, my experience with working with the schedules is they are extremely content specific. For example, those general schedules are not something we typically deal with to much degree because every single topic within the Department of Environmental Protection typically has its own schedule, and it's going to be based on the subject of whatever that email is. So if it's touching on a different topic, it's going to be retained for a certain amount of time. We might have a few kind of more general schedules, like our commissioner correspondence is archival because it's to that level of importance typically, but it's not something as simple as calling something an email or calling something a text message. So I'm not sure there's a perfect way to address this. And I think the other question, or I guess concern that I'd have is, a lot of this is baked into the statute itself. And when we're looking at FOA, we're, kind of piggybacking on what Eric was saying, we're looking at two different questions. Usually the first question is whether it's government business. And the second question is whether it's in possession of the agency. And that's ultimately going to be a legal determination type of thing, which is, who controls these records and where are they? I know that's certainly a challenge that we have to deal with. And ultimately the question becomes, if it's not something that's in possession of the agency, are we obligated to go get it? Or do we put in policies that say we're not allowed to use those technologies because it's not something that's going to be subject to FOA? And then there's consequences to that, where, do we put the state behind the ball here when the state's not, is the state not allowed to use text messages because those texts are maintained or partially maintained off, with a carrier? Or are we not allowed to use WhatsApp because Facebook or Google will maintain those technologies and we don't have control over it? I think those are ultimately the kind of questions that come into play here that we need to be concerned about, which are, these may not be in possession of the agency. And how do we go about answering that question when that's kind of the state of the record? It's not always going to be a retention question. It's going to be a matter of, are we going to obligate the states to create records or not use those technologies? And what are the consequences of those types of choices?
All good points. I would be really reluctant to, exclude text from FOA as a matter of policy or rule of any kind, because it's almost like an invitation to go off book. Chris, and I know you weren't advocating that, Chris. I just was just getting behind you there.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. I guess one question on that point. I think what Kevin said is those are great points. I mean, I don't foresee, just as a practical and I suppose even a political matter, the idea of saying, okay, since we can't preserve text messages, you can't use text messages anymore. I just don't see that. I think that kind of ship has sailed at this point. It's sort of our responsibility to start figuring out ways to catch up to it technologically and policy wise. One question I have, maybe Kate might know, or Eric, is there any kind of platform that you're aware of that's in use by any government at any government level in any state for text messaging where the platform itself archives in some way the messages that are sent in the way that we would like them to be?
I'm not aware of anyone having the technology to archive text messages, short of printing them out and saving them that way, or turning them into like a PDF, saving them that way. But as a text message, no. There are vendors who will archive social media accounts. They're capturing it constantly. So if you're doing messaging over like WhatsApp, things like that, they can gather some of those things, but off of your basic phone texting, no, I'm not aware of anyone who's grabbing those in its original state. You'd have to email it to yourself or convert it into some other way.
Right, because if you can't search the document, the content of the document, it wouldn't come up in a search if you're trying to fulfill a FOA request through that form. Yeah, Kevin?
This is a little bit of a question for Eric. Do you have a sense of how much thought or that IT goes through when they roll out different platforms to the state? I mean, Texas is its own animal, I think, or WhatsApp, these kind of things that people might use, outside the standard channels of the state. But, for example, when the pandemic hit, Teams was the first thing to get rolled out, or we're looking at Zoom, and those each have their own chat features. And that's kind of the first question that comes out when we start using new technological platforms, is all of a sudden in the background we'll have that, okay, well, what do we do when we get forward for this information? Are people going to be able to use chats, or are they not going to be able to use chats? Or those types of questions, I guess, discussed when IT is looking at various technologies to use or to roll out to the state kind of broadly?
Yeah, it should be. And I'd have to say that, thanks to the biweekly discussion group that Kate's been leading here since January, I think, that includes IT as well as the AG's office, both Brenda Kelty and John Bolton from the AG's office, and a couple representatives from agencies. We are discussing those things, but I think realistically, it's not the natural tendency for the technology-minded people to do that. So it really falls upon the larger information governance perspective and the records management perspective that isn't always naturally at the table, that we have to kind of force ourselves into that conversation. So that was a question that actually Brenda brought up when the pandemic hit, and her first question to IT was, how are you ensuring the preservation of these chat messages in Microsoft Teams, or the videos, and then everybody jumped on Zoom right away. Well, Zoom was not something that was in our portfolio of offerings. We had Microsoft Teams. So now we have, Zoom meetings, and unless you have a paid license, you can't record those meetings. So we quickly had to say, hey, you agencies, you should have paid licenses so you can record your meetings and make them discoverable government records. And the pushback from some of the agencies was, well, if we can get it free, why should we pay something, you know? So we had to have that hard conversation with them about, wait a minute, you're doing government business, you have to be transparent. But it's so easy to just kind of jump on a new technology and not have that, you know, the considerations that should be baked in that start with information governance and discoverability and records management should be. And thanks to our new state archivist, I have to say, she's really been leading that discussion with, you know, making the technology people that run the Microsoft environment, you know, more sensitive to the records management issues. But it is not a natural tendency for the technologists to think about that.
Well, I will say, just from looking through the attachments, Eric, that you pulled together and looking at some of those policies, the policies are much more fleshed out than I had guessed at the state level. So, you know, kudos to you and your team for doing that. And I have no idea whether MMA or MSMA or whatever the county commissions association is, whether this is on the radar. Does anybody know? Linda, do you know?
Well, I think at the local level, I think the protocol, it must be coming from MMA. That's all I can figure is, you know, everybody get at least a town email account, smarten up, don't use text. So it's becoming part of the culture now, but I just keep going back to, you know, why are people even using their phones, texting about business or Facebook or whatever social media there is? Why are we even having that conversation at this point? You know, where is the training at the front end so that people know which software and which equipment they can use and they can't use? And I guess I'm curious about that at the state level, Eric, is you know, what would people be using text for? Other than, as Kate said, you know, let's meet in 5 minutes.
Well, I think it goes back to awareness and training and you know, Judy said, you know, gave a compliment about how good these, how fleshed out these state policies seem to be, but are people really aware of them and following them? That's the challenge. You know, you can have something in writing and you can send out annual acknowledgements and all that, but are they really aware of it? Or do they pay attention? Do they follow and practice? And to your point, Linda, about, you know, why would they be using text or chat messages? It's convenience. And so to counter, like, you know, oh, we should, you know, change that policy. You know, we should, you know, cancel that program, you know. It's easy to do that, just respond to a, you know, text message or a chat message, whether it's Teams or elsewise. But it comes back, in my mind, it comes back to, you know, are you teaching correct principles about, you know, unless it's like Kate said, unless it's just some transitory value, low value thing, anything of significance, even if it's not convenient, you get off your phone and you do that in email so that it's capturable, or you write a document and you save that as a document so that it's you know, filed in the correct place. But the technology is makes it so convenient. I remember when Microsoft Teams first was being announced, and the Microsoft people were here, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, you know, about implementing the, you know, these chat, you know, the chat function and all that. And one of them commented that they see that email is basically going to go away, and we're going to be doing just team to team, small group chat messages. And I raised my little hand and I said, you know, what about the discoverability of that? And now we have more places that it's going to be difficult or impossible to find government records. But that's just the way that, it's convenient. And it's just every year there's just more and more options for making it convenient and maybe less discoverable. So to me, the only real solution, or one of the key solutions, I shouldn't say only, is it's so important to make people aware of the principles of their stewardship as government staff and officials. They're stewards of the public trust, and so they have to be mindful and not do, as I used to say in some training sessions, not do a Hillary Clinton, where she's the Secretary of State and she's conducting personal business and state, U.S. State Department business on her private email server. I mean, and the IT guy should be drawn and quartered for letting her do that and actually being the enabler of that, the State Department. But it comes down to teaching principles and just the emphasis of that regardless of what says in policy, I can't vouch that everybody is following that policy. And so the training and the awareness as stewards of the public trust is paramount. But at the same time, to Kate's point earlier, do you just depend on everybody doing the right thing, or do you have a backstop of technology that you can capture it anyway, like we do, even if somebody deleted emails inappropriately, substantive emails, not transitory, we can discover it through the Microsoft Cloud if we have to.
Thank you. Kate?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add, everything that Eric said is so totally spot on. A lot of it too, from what I'm hearing from state employees and seeing, is that the more that people are working remotely, you have a lot of people who don't have great internet access, even though they need to work remotely. So there's a lot of quick discussions over text, and then also jumping on the computer, going back and forth, particularly when the internet's down, for folks at home. We're also talking to agencies who are doing so much more, not necessarily by text, but over social media with their constituency work. So they're talking with the public through social media, because that's where the public is. And that's where the public is comfortable interacting with them. The public is contacting them on social media. So some of this is about the growing technology and meeting people where they're comfortable, what they're using. With all of that said, I will be the first person to say one of my goals for the archives is to do a much better job on increased training for not only all state employees, but especially the ones that are new and coming in, helping them to right from the beginning understand their responsibilities around records management, and expectations around that, so that it's built into how they do their work right from the beginning. I'm not sure that that's always happened in the past. And so that's something we need to develop and grow, but that's going to take time.
Yeah, I know the elected officials training that happens at the legislative level, it's like 60 minutes or 90 minutes at the beginning of the session. There's no way to squeeze all that they need to know in that time frame. And it's also, for a lot of them, their first time in office is probably a pretty heady day to be in there for the very first time. So it's a lot to ask them to absorb all that. Chris, did you have a question or want to weigh in on something?
I did. Yeah, thanks. First, I would just say, just as a general observation, that in my view, it would be helpful at the very least going forward to have a standing invitation to Kate or someone from her office at our meetings, because I think it's so important to be taking into account this aspect of access. So that's just more of a general thought I have that I thought I'd share at this point. To Linda's question earlier, I can only imagine, and I can only imagine if during a a meeting, a legislative meeting or otherwise, I happen to have the texting number for an elected official or someone participating in that meeting, where I want to make sure that they know I want to say something, or, hey, you should make this point, or remember what we talked about, or, hey, look at this PDF document that I've attached to this text message. That would be very valuable, not just transitory, but very substantive, potentially, communication that as a member of the public or as a lobbyist would be very handy to have available to me. And I think that for me, that the fact that, not everyone has elected officials texting number, only, it's not usually something that would be available necessarily. And that some do, for me, it seems like some, that level of access, I guess it's always been a part of government, but the access that some have but not others, I think is something that I guess bothers me a bit. The question, I have two questions. First, and I know I threw them out earlier, but I threw out a lot of questions and comments earlier. One, do we know if the legislature has a policy of the kind that we were just talking about with respect to executive branch employees? And the second question is, I know that Brenda does a FOA training, and I didn't know, not that I would want any more work for Kate's office, but I didn't know if there's any kind of similar type training that's given to new legislators, for example, by the state archives. So those are the questions I have.
Yeah, at the state archives, we do have training available on our website. And we try to encourage and point people to that, but we simply don't have enough staff available to go out and train every new state employee in person. That would probably be more effective and more memorable, but we just don't have the staffing available to do it yet. Be awesome
Do you
to
have
grow
anything?
that.
Do you have anything for legislators specifically, for example?
Not specifically for legislators, no. What we have on our website in the records management section is more general to state government. But that would be great to add.
And as far as the policies, Eric, is that?
I don't know.
No. Okay.
Yeah, to Chris's point, and I think you have made this for several years, this idea of lobbyists contacting lawmakers, during committee hearings or committee discussion, ban the use of technology in committee rooms while they're in session. Is that too extreme? Must every text that is created or sent during a public meeting become a document, but all else doesn't need to be? It's a universe of documents. If we don't have the storage for what we've got now, that's just so much more. But I agree with Chris. It's a huge problem of this direct contact during conversations. Kevin, you've had your hand up for a while.
So we keep moving around quite a bit, so it's hard to keep track of where we're at. I guess the comments I was trying to make at some point a while back was, it seems like technology and, FOA in general just naturally in conflict here. And I worry with a lot of this with, and our retention schedules at the same time are also kind of in conflict in the sense that everything was at one point designed for paper, and paper makes a lot of sense because paper is something that you can print off once and you can stick in a box and retain for 30 years, and there it is. And then you can destroy it and it's gone. And now we're dealing with questions about, do we have access to these? Because it's not as simple as a piece of paper anymore. It is, like you said, it could be as complex as a conversation that's taking place in the midst of a public proceeding, which might be recorded elsewhere, but that's off the record. And it's a lot of these types of questions which make this extremely difficult. And like I tried to echo earlier, I'm not sure there's a great solution other than naturally prohibiting some of these technologies, just because there's not any way for us to retain them. And even if we were to take a tack to say, okay, let's direct the state or direct the town or the county or vice versa to only use certain technologies, even those are going to bring about certain problems, because I think, if as we work towards electronically or maintaining electronic medium, with archives, we're going to run into even more problems, I think, on the state side, because as I've run into, in the past, we'd have a piece of paper and we'd send it off to a record center, then it would go over to archives. And there's one document that when somebody requests a record, we can say, okay, you can head into our file room or you can head to archives and you can look at this one record. Now, even after something is supposed to have been destroyed, it's going to show up in email. And it doubles and triples the time that we have to do searches for FOAs, because something that might not exist or shouldn't exist is still causing massive amounts of emails that have to be reviewed as a part of FOA requests. And I can only imagine how complex that would be when we're talking about text message conversations, even if those were searchable, even if we did have copies of those. How do we allow someone to search through those without having somebody, in a FOA officer or records officer role, look at all of those? Then we're going to start talking about fees, because all of a sudden we're talking about hours and hours and hours. And I know we're going to talk about those at some point, and I know we're going to talk about waivers at some point, but all of these things, they interact and they cause problems for both sides of this, this equations. We understand that obviously people want to see records, but the more records we retain, the more difficult it is for us to find those records, even acting in good faith. And that's not even including the fact that, to a certain extent, people are going to act in bad faith. And hopefully that doesn't happen, but it happens. But even acting in good faith, this is really hard to do. And it takes a lot of time and effort, no matter what we do. And I'm not sure how we get around that. I think that the more we talk about it, the more kind of variables we might end up adding to the equation. So.
Yeah. Linda, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just real quickly, I just want to throw in that I know just from local and county and local and school boards that they all do look to the state for guidance, even though they might say, oh, the state says, but everybody does look for that central core of, how to proceed when something new or something different comes. So I think as we sort of are refining this discussion of the principles, that maybe it not just apply to the state, but maybe it applies in something that filters down to every level of government.
Eric?
I just want to conclude on the training comment. As OIT's records officer, I used to do, and I should continue to do, I used to do quarterly training for new employees that come in, and I use the state archives materials for that are, as she said, it was posted on their website. But, rather than looking to the state archives to do that for 15,000 plus people, delegated down to at the agency or bureau level, any records officer is doing his job or her job should be making sure that they, take advantage of that training. So, and the same could be said for the local entities. It can be issued centrally, but then executed locally.
Chris?
Yeah, I just want to sort of echo what Kevin was saying earlier. I think what he said is very important. And I say that as someone who also worked for a state agency. We've gone from a time when paper records, when the ability to manage them was somewhat manageable, and where the need to, and the amount of information that was maybe the equivalent of turning on the kitchen sink every once in a while. And now with the explosion of technology, we have information that's coming at us like a fire hose, nonstop. And it's growing exponentially. And the ability to, as Kevin said, I think it's such an important point. Even good faith efforts can, it can be impossible to, given, depending on the scope of a FOA request, you can make the best efforts possible, and you might just not know that something that you didn't think existed over here, there's a ghost of it over there, and therefore it exists. And so it makes me wonder, kind of going back, is there a need to start, resorting to legal constructs like, text messages aren't public records, or records that an agency knows it's destroyed here are not foldable from if they're in OIT's custody or something like this. Not advocating for these things. I'm just saying, I'm trying to think of ways to make this manageable, given the universe of information that that all government levels, agency levels, I think deal with, but certainly at the state level. One question I know well, two questions. I don't know if it sounded like Kevin might be saying that one of our recommendations should that be that we all go back to paper format. Just kidding.
That's what I heard.
I don't think that would be a good recommendation, but just kidding, Kevin. In seriousness, though, I know I've asked it a couple of times, but and I don't know, maybe no one knows the answer, so I'll even ask any of the analysts who are on the call. Is there any kind of legislative policy that governs record retention regarding texts and emails and such, to your knowledge, to anyone's knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, there's not a policy that exists. I almost put this in chat and then I decided I should make it public. I don't know that there's a policy. We will certainly check. I don't think there are a lot of policies that govern that type of activity of legislators. I think the training is what we should probably, what you want to focus on. And maybe, I know that Brenda does a lot of the training, or she does all the training. Maybe that's something that we need to talk to, or the subcommittee or the whole committee needs to talk to Brenda about including in to the legislative training every 2 years.
Thanks, Peggy. And I think you're right. I mean, I'm not aware of any kind of policies. I know at one time, or at least I seem to recall that at one time, I don't know if it was some sort of joint rule or something, but there was something in place where you couldn't conduct electronic business on the, I don't know if it was the House floor or both houses floor, using electronic devices, but this was years ago, and I might be misremembering, but I don't think that that's in place anymore, given at least what I see on when I watch sessions. So.
Huh. Okay, where does this leave us? We want to find out if there's a policy for the legislature, also for municipal and county and school governments.
So we did reach out, Anna reached out to Kate Dufour at Maine Municipal Association about kind of this question. And Kate said that they rely on the archives, what applies to the local governments, but also using those general schedules for what they, keep. And so if there's nothing specific about text messages, then they don't have anything specific about that.
So there's no, in terms of their training, encouragement for municipal officials just to use official emails to conduct business. They don't parse that out.
You know what, I don't think the question was really about training so much as what kind of policies they actually have. So yeah. I mean, that I know that's interrelated, but we can certainly follow up.
Well, and of course, even if MMA had a sample policy, they can't foist it on a town that's not going to adopt it, right? It's because it's not a requirement. So,
but we'll follow up on that as well.
Okay. Okay. Would you mind checking with Maine School Management also and see how they handle that? Okay. Yes, Kevin.
Maybe just a recommendation, but like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of these are legal questions in some ways about regarding, whether things are in possession of a public entity. I don't know if Brenda Keelty would have maybe some research into that, or some policies that might be in place from the AG's office. I think not saying there are necessarily guaranteed answers to some of those, but that might be helpful in terms of, with education, everything's going to be technology specific. I think, each medium is going to bring up a different question, but I would think text messages is so ubiquitous that they would have at least some sort of take regarding, whether we need to add anything at all to the statute, or whether this is already, a cut and dry legal issue. These are public records that are in the possession of an agency that should be produced, type of thing. I think that's generally the tack that the state takes most of the time. It leads to discouragement of text messages, but I'm sure Brenda might have kind of more of an analysis of that.
And she was supposed to be here today, but couldn't make the meeting. She was also going to walk us through list management tools and kind of how those are employed by some elected officials and what we might be able to talk about there. So we definitely can bring that up at our next meeting. And I want to weigh in on the idea of like saying, just don't use texts, because intellectually, I understand that. I think it probably would be a smart thing to do, but it would also make government officials less efficient. I'm certain of it. And that is, I think we have to consider that too. And I don't know, I think, Kevin, you were just talking about paper and electronics. So at some point, we're going to stop talking about paper altogether. There will be no more paper generated. So we really do have to focus on the digital piece, because the paper stuff, sounds like we've got that locked in. Chris?
Yeah, I agree. And I do have a question. And I think the points that Kevin made earlier are great ones again. I know there have been, controversies that have happened in the country, where someone makes a post on a social media that, is maybe somehow it's related to government, but it's on a private platform, not a state platform, but it still relates somehow to government business. And, I can't think of a way that an agency, other than maybe printing off copies of, messages as they come in to, a social media account that allows for posting. I don't know how that would be captured. So I think these are great questions as far as, when it's not in the government's, in a government agency's possession or control. How do you deal with that? One question I have, because I'm not quite clear, I know there were two topics that this subcommittee was going to look at, and you just alluded to it, Judy, and maybe I'm not quite clear on what the second one is about. So I was hoping maybe you could clarify. Is it listservs or something like this?
Management tools like MailChimp and that sort of thing that a lawmaker may use, during a campaign, but then continues to use to stay in touch with constituents once elected to office. And there's a whole lot of these and growing kinds of tools to be able to interact with groups of people at a time.
So is it the view, and I haven't really thought about this, to be completely honest, is it the view that if I'm an elected official and I use one of these, and I somehow there's a nexus to, I use it with my email account linked to it, my government email account linked to it, that nexus is what makes this an issue? Or is it the view that I can keep using this thing that I used during my campaign separately, even though I'm an elected official, I can use this still independently to, and privately, I guess, to communicate with the people who, supported me? Or is it a view that once you're elected, even those things become public? I guess that's sort of one of the questions I have. I'd be interested to hear from the media standpoint.
Well, this came up as an actual situation where a local elected official was using an official.gov address and conducting public business on MailChimp. The recipient saw the email from the public official address. The email address was linked to that public official, but it was hosted on the MailChimp platform. and not the local government account. So should it be requested under FOA, it's not in the possession of the agency or the official, it's in the possession of the MailChimp platform. And the requester did get texts that were responsive, but from this platform, but all the metadata was stripped out, including the addresses of the recipients. And it was the recipient addresses, the group in this communication chain that was of most interest to the requester. So the requester got the content of the conversation, but not the people who were in the virtual room. And this is somebody who had contacted Brenda, not filing a formal complaint, just saying, I think this is a problem.
So say, I guess, just on one point of that, and I appreciate that. I remember that story now that you just said it again. Say the .gov address had not been used. It was some other private email type account. Would there be a question still as to whether or not is that what makes the difference? The fact that a .gov account was used?
And this person was conducting public business through that medium.
Okay. And by public business, this was somehow related to some sort of official business of whatever it was that they were responsible for, not just, hey, thanks for electing me and I hope you elect me again. And
Yeah. So that's the content piece of it. But also how would a member of the public even know it exists to go out and search for what may be a very vibrant conversation that this local official is conducting business with a group that the public should know who he's conversing, or she, I don't know who this person is conversing with and how they came to a decision on something, but it's undiscoverable. It's completely blind. So, and I don't know how we could ever fix that, but Brenda was going to walk us through that problem area. Eric, you had some thoughts on this as well, if you wanted to chime.
Yeah, so that relates back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, and we showed on the screen near the beginning of the federal guidance and from 2014 and 15, where they say that if you're conducting government business on some other platform that's not the government agency's discoverable platform, you have to either copy or forward within 20 days into that platform so that it becomes a government possession record. So that's that same principle that I wanted to kind of remind you that we don't have explicitly here, but what they did is they amended the Federal Records Act of 1950 and added this amendment in 2014 that says, what we just talked about. So that's they're using the basis of the Federal Records Act, and they keep enhancing it as needed as time goes on, as situations come up, as technology presents these challenges. They didn't just issue a new law. They went back to the Federal Records Act of 1950 and amended it, and then they codified it into the 44 USC Code of Federal Regulations, and then NARA picked it up and issued guidance around it, as well as the Office of Management and Budget to the agency heads to make sure that all the bases were covered. But the foundation of it really was to leverage the Federal Records Act of 1950 as amended, and to make it explicit in the statute and in the National Archives Records Administration guidance and the OMB guidance to federal agencies that this specific thing, if you have, other platforms and you're talking about government business, then you need to get it into a platform, an agency government controlled platform that's discoverable. We don't have that here, but that's why I added that as food for thought, that maybe we should leverage that.
So Eric, just under the scenario that it's not the elected officials or the government officials platform, some citizen group gets together and starts launching a conversation about, development in some main city, let's say, and then draws in the public official into the conversation. The email address is not attached to this person at all, but then suddenly that becomes policy discussions. He's weighing in, maybe somebody else comes in, and suddenly he's going to the city council with this proposal from this group. Would all of that have to be gathered up and turned over in 20 days where he wasn't the originator?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And what's the privacy aspect of that? The First Amendment and all that might come in. But we have little snippets that we showed earlier of both HR policy and OIT policy, whether or not you're using a state issued device or not, your personal device. If it's government business and you're the government official or staff, then you have the obligation as a steward of the public trust to make sure that that's discoverable. But those are good questions about how deep do you go to bring in, the threads of people that thought they were talking privately. That's a good question.
Because that is why they talk on these platforms, is to have a closed conversation.
Yeah, and to be off the radar, or to have, you might say, close conversation, but sometimes it's just innocent, talking to your constituents or whatever. But when it crosses the line, and this is where Hillary Clinton got in trouble over injudicious use of her private email server that was commingled with state department business, and some of it found to be, classified. It is a very, very poor judgment. But the guidance that was already there in 14 and 15 prior to that happening, that she should have been made aware of, but they didn't do their job and make sure she was aware of that. In other words, it was a training awareness issue in that case. Should never have been commingled.
So it sounds like we really need to talk about amping up the training. For sure. What other next steps should we be taking? Other than going back to paper to make Kevin's job easier.
No, we're not going back to paper.
Kidding, I'm kidding.
I don't have any warehouse space. One thing that I think has been really useful in some of the working groups that Eric and I are part of is we're trying to dig deep and research to see what technology is out there to help with some of this. Are there vendors? Are there software programs? Are there options to make it more automatic, more user-friendly to do some of what we want to do? Part of that is defining what we want. And then part of that is researching what's out and available. And I think luckily with, Maine IT and the archives and the AG's office kind of regularly meeting and working together, we're picking our way very slowly through some of these topics. But if there's specific topics you'd like our working groups to work on, I think it could be a good format. That might be useful.
I just want you to know I'm writing this down on paper. I think it's
Great.
rude
You need to
talk away
preserve
from my screen.
You need to preserve that, archive it.
Oh, okay. Well, are we, Chris, go ahead. Oh.
I was going to suggest, but I really don't think it's necessary to, I'm always, we always ask, well, what are other states doing? I think the sense I get is that they're doing what we're doing, at various extents. So I guess what I would say is maybe I'm suggesting something we don't do, which is that, because I wouldn't want, OPLA staff, to be doing that when I think my sense is, like I said, I think I think this is a universal, this seems to be a universal sort of issue that no one really has a good solution to yet. But I did want to ask, it sounds like, I know one of the things I think you might have written down is what are other policies? And what was the other, I guess maybe I'm asking, what do you have written down so far? Policies of
For the
such?
legislature, for Maine Municipal, for Maine School Management Association, and for the county commissioners. I don't know what the formal title of their association is.
Okay.
And to what extent, I guess I would like to know, me personally would like to know, having a sample policy on their website, do people draw it down and turn it into something, or are they actually used? I don't know. I know when MMA put together the sample policy on remote meetings, that was very well used, and it was really efficient for towns to just pop in their own information. So that could be a good outcome if they don't have something existing. Linda?
Yeah, I don't want to forget Eric's point, his suggestion or his description of the, the federal practice of the portability of bringing something like MailChimp over. So I wonder if we should flesh that one out.
Yep.
And then the other thing was, as we're talking, and we talk about text, I'm just watching my computer as it's bringing text over that I do on my phone automatically. And I don't even know why it's doing it, but it's doing it. So it's already captured, at least on the Apple. So I don't know about the PCs, but that seems to be a fairly simple process that we already have. So that was it.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will go through my notes and coalesce all of this for tomorrow's full committee meeting, and then we definitely will schedule additional meetings. Kate, would you be willing to join us?
Certainly, count me in.
Okay, wonderful. You were extremely helpful. Chris?
Yeah, I guess maybe just a question for Eric. I'm not sure if you know off the top of your head, so maybe this is another thing for the next meeting, but does OIT have any kind of capability to develop an app for texting where all this stuff could be? Is that something OIT does, is develop programs or apps like that where, everyone would have to use this app if you're conducting government business, and it would capture all this stuff?
Well, I guess I could take that back and see what we could do with that. But my answer has always been that because your text messages, your phone to phone text messages, I think of it like Morse code, it's like a signal phone to phone that's converted into short text messages. That's AT&T, Verizon, that's on their network. It has nothing to do with what we have any control or visibility into. So, but I think maybe working with the archives, we could maybe come up with some behavioral guidance. And I'd be curious of how Linda gets her text messages automatically into email. I want to distinguish, though, that when it comes to like these chat messages, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the phone to phone text messages, because we used to have Skype. And so the Skype messages would be automatically linked to Outlook and would show up in your Outlook folder called Conversations folder. So when you did a Skype message in Skype, it was linked to Outlook and discoverable through Outlook and found in the Conversations folder. But with text messages, that's a phone to phone signal that OIT has no control over, other than maybe working with the archives to issue some guidance about, correct principles to attempt to save anything that's not of a transitory nature. I'm late, I'm 10 minutes late, nobody cares about that, But if you're talking about decision-making, high-level policies, then that's record retention worthy. But the mechanics of how to do that, since OIT has no control over AT&T's or Verizon's, pushing that content over the phone lines. I hope that answers what you're asking.
Okay, well, unless there's any objections, we can end early. And we'll get some possible dates out for the next meeting. I'd like to try to meet again before the next Right to Know meeting, so we have something to report out. So we'll try to get something on the calendar in the next couple of weeks. Peggy, how long do you think you'll need to get answers back to us on where the policy, if there's policies? Do you need a couple of weeks?
Oh, we probably don't need a couple of weeks, and I'm just looking at, so I think Right to Know meets again on December 1st.
Okay,
Yes. So that doesn't give you a lot of time because of the Thanksgiving holiday.
right.
Yeah, we should definitely have information back for you. Everybody's pretty good about getting back to us.
Okay.
Quickly, so,
All right.
yeah, a week at the most, I think.
Okay. Well, Peggy, I'll work with you to put out like a couple of different dates, and then we'll just survey the crowd and see what works best for everybody,
Okay.
and make
Yeah,
sure that Brenda would be able to join us as well.
Okay.
Good. So we
Sounds
stand
good.
adjourned? Okay. Thank you, everybody.